In this video, I'd like to look at Vue with checkboxes. I'm going to do sort of a simple, more sort of hard-coded version, and then I'm going to use a V4 to generate the checkboxes more dynamically from the data in a Vue object. All right, so here is version 1. If you want this code, it can be found at this URL. And it does the following. Just allows the user to choose a bunch of checkboxes, allows the user to choose what movies they've seen, um, and puts them down here in an unordered list. And there's some styling. So I'll show you the styling, the HTML, and the JavaScript. Okay, so the CSS is some color for the page, some font size for the inputs, some styling of the labels, making them all the same size, rounded corners, a little bit of padding, and then this is the styling of the label that is adjacent to the checkboxes. So that was the style. Here's the HTML, a connection to the Vue CDN. Here's the connection to the CSS that we just talked about. And then here's the HTML. So there is a container, in this case, a div with an ID, and that is where the element to which I'm going to sort of mount, I think is the Vue word, mount the Vue code. So I just need a container with some Vue sort of stuff, and that is this. Let me make a little bit more room here. Okay, and then I just have a sequence of inputs of the checkbox type and labels. So here's the input. It's of the type checkbox. The ID is just some unique name. So I just made it the name of the movie, The Godfather. Normally, I wouldn't like an ID with a space in it like that, but doesn't matter too much here. A value, what you're going to get from checking the checkbox, and the V model. So the V model is associated with, in this case, because it's a sort of a checkbox list, this will be associated with an array called user choices. And then I have the corresponding label. That is after, in this case, after the input, I match the 4 of the label with the ID of the checkbox. That makes them work as a team. So I can check on the label or check on the checkbox, and they have the same effect. And then between the open label and the closed label, I have the name of the movie. I have a break tag, and then it's repeat, repeat, repeat. So that's just all the checkboxes. And then down here at the bottom of the page, I have an UL, an unordered list element. And then for the LIs, the list items within that unordered list, I'm using a V4, and I'm looping over that array user choices. And I'm using this sort of, I'll usually call it the dummy name, the element of the particular iteration, and I'm using the sort of curly notation of Vue to say I want that item, and this is going to be an array just of simple strings. So no objects, no property to specify. These are just strings. So curly item will get me what I want. And then down at the bottom of the page, I'm connecting to the check.js code, which is the Vue code I need to sort of polish this off. And so here's my check.js. And there's not much to this. Most of the work for that was done on the HTML page. This is saying I am having a thing called movies that I'm going to mount over at that particular element on the page with the ID Vue check. So this hashtag or pound means ID. So that there should be something Vue underscore check on the other side, and there was. There's not much to this view. There is some data, and all I'm specifying is that there's going to be something called user underscore choices. That's an empty array to start off with. So that was that version, not much to it. And again, most of the work was in the HTML here. So that was the simplest version. Now let's go over to a more dynamic version. So let me close those, go to a more dynamic version. And it looks the same. Oh, if you want this code, here's the URL for it. Okay. And now what this one looks like is the same. I added some like code so that I'm going to sort of keep track of two things, of the name of a movie and some sort of code for it. Okay, so if I were doing something fancy, all these movies would have like an internet movie database code or something, and I could do those. So I could have some kind of ID or something. Um, okay, so the CSS is pretty much the same as it was before. The HTML still has the link to the CDN, still has the connection here to the CSS. Now here we have we still have the div in which we are going to mount the view code, and it has the ID view_check. And now instead of explicitly writing out all of the individual checkboxes and their labels, I'm going to generate that in code by looping over an array. So let's just have a peek at the JS code to show you that array. Now I've added to the data over here a movies property, and that movie's property has a value that is an array, and it is an array of objects. So this is a very JSON notation. So there's the name of a property, colon, and then the value of the property. But since the value of this property is an array, we start with a square bracket, and within the square bracket, I have curly brackets. So those are objects. And then the object has two properties, text and value, the spelled out title of the movie, and then some kind of code I just made up. Okay, so compared to the previous version where the labels were, the inputs and the labels were all explicitly hard-coded, here they are coming out of a V4. So I am looping over movies, which we saw was an array of objects, and I have a movie as I go through my iterations. And when I have a movie, I'm creating an input of the checkbox type. I am binding this colon when I'm in a V4, for instance, and generating different things based on the data, on the item of the element we're iterating over. We do a V bind, and so this colon, you can sometimes see the word V bind in front, or if you see just the colon, then the V bind is implied. And I'm making an ID based on the text of the movie, and then the value of the movie I'm making to be the entire object. So I'm going to have access to all the properties because my value is an object. And the V model is, again, user_choices, which is going to be an array, but it's going to be an array of the values, and the values this time are objects. So user choices before ended up to be an array of strings because the values were strings. Now it's going to be an array of objects because my values are objects. I have a label before of the label. It's also V-bound, matches the ID of the input, so that makes them work as a team. And here between the open label and the closed label, I'm using the curly notation. A movie is an object. It has a property text, so I'm showing you the title of the movie. And then down here, these are the chosen movies. So I have two arrays in over here. One was the user choices, which is an array which starts off empty. And then I have the explicit movie array. So these are the possible choices, and then these are the user choices. And down here at the bottom, we're going over the user movies. So we're looping over the user movies in an unordered list. The V4 belongs to the list item. That's what's repeated. The LI, the list items are repeated. And I'm looping over the user choices, which is now an array of objects. And so item is an element of that array. So item is an object, and that those objects had property text and value. So I'm displaying both sort of just to show that I can. Just one last peek at the check2.js. Again, not too much to the Vue code here, more coming. But so we have some Vue code. I've called it movies, and then I'm going to create an app from movies and mount it over on the HTML page to an element with the ID of Vue_check. And I have two arrays, the user choices array, which is an empty array to start, and then the movie, which is an array of objects with properties, text, and value. So that's what I want to show you, sort of the original, more hard-coded version, and where more of the work was in HTML. Now we've moved at least some more of at least the data portion of the work over to the JavaScript and are generating the HTML more dynamically with a V4. But even in the original, the user choices were generated with a V4. But now the overall choices from which the user's choosing were also from a V4 in this version. And in the next version, I'm going to sort of read this information from a file, from a JSON file. So instead of hard coding JSON into my JavaScript file, I will read it as an external file, but that's in another video. That's all I wanted to show you on this one. Thanks for your attention.